Hi, my name is Ryan Kopinski, and today I'm going to show you how to automatically generate thumbnails for your USDZ files. Let's get started. Okay, so we're going to create a single view app. We're going to click next. I'm going to name this ARTG. It stands for Augmented Reality Thumbnail Generator. And the important part is that we're actually going to select SwiftUI. I've been learning SwiftUI some more, and it's really cool, and so that's what we're going to use for today's tutorial. And then we're going to click next and create the project. If you don't have any experience with SwiftUI, you can still follow this tutorial. I highly recommend you learn it though, because it is the future of Apple's UI frameworks. Now, the cool thing about SwiftUI is you can actually preview whatever you're doing in code right side by side. Just press on resume and it's gonna load the preview. Now this is actually building the app, and so we're gonna wait for it. Okay, so that's where we have our hello world. Now, what we're gonna do is we're gonna create a simple page with a title, an image, and a button. And so that's what I'm gonna do right now in SwiftUI. Again, I'm still learning, so I might be a bit rusty on SwiftUI, but you can learn alongside me. So we're gonna write USDC thumbnail. And the cool thing about SwiftUI is you can actually use modifiers to style any view really. And so we're gonna select large title. And you can see how it's updating in real time in the actual canvas. The right side is called the canvas. And so then we're gonna make it bold. And there we go, that looks pretty good. Okay, so now we have that. Now, in SwiftUI, the body variable in the content view, there can only be one view or one variable. And so what we're gonna do in order to add more content is we're gonna use container views. You can have a horizontal stack, a vertical stack, also a Z stack. You'll learn more about that if you do a deep dive in SwiftUI. But what we're gonna do is we're gonna embed the text in a vertical stack. Now, you can type it out or you can command click and you'll see this menu pop up. And what we're gonna do is we're gonna say embed in VStack. There we go. Now you don't really see anything changing, but once I start adding more elements, you will. Okay, and what we'll do next is we'll add an image right below our text, and we're gonna use a system image, which is part of the SF symbols library, and we're gonna use the photo image. And now you can see it automatically added that image. I didn't have to do any, auto layout or whatever. SwiftUI took care of it. Now, some of the modifiers that we'll use is we're gonna say, okay, we want this image to be larger. We don't want to be able to resize it. And so we're gonna add a resizable modifier. That's gonna make it bigger. Obviously that is too big. Then what we're gonna do is we're gonna say, okay, we want an aspect ratio for the image. We want it to be a square thumbnail, okay? So it's a 1/1. So 1 width, 1 height ratio, which is just a 1 ratio. And then the content mode, we're gonna do fit. So we actually want the image to fit within there. Now, as you can see, it's not very, it's all the way to the edges, and we don't really want that. And so we're gonna add padding all around. So top, bottom, left, right. And this is our preview image. Now you can see this is really simple to just modify how you want your image to look. And so I really enjoy using SwiftUI. And then the final thing we're gonna add in terms of UI is a button. Now there are a lot of things that you can do with buttons. So let's see, action. Okay, there we go. So we're going to just leave this blank for now, and I'm actually gonna type this out differently. So I'm going to just type in action, like that, and then I'm going to do that. Just because I have some of the sample code that I want to do because I've just recently worked with this, and so I have some sample code on my other screen. And so this is how easy it is to create a button. Now, in the action, we can actually call functions, because when we generate, we likely want to generate a thumbnail. But for now, we're going to leave that blank. But we're going to have generate text, and we're going to add a modifier again there. And I want to make this a semi-bold font. And so it's super easy to do that. And there we go. I'm also going to add some padding to our button, because it'll make it look better, and it's also good for spacing. There we go. So that's how quick it was to lay out this view that we're going to use, and it's just phenomenal what SwiftUI can do. Okay, so now that we have this, there are a few more things that we have to do before we're going to work on the actual thumbnail code. And so the first thing we're going to do, create a constant, and we're going to call this placeholder image. And we're going to make that an image, and it's going to be the same system image that we've used in the actual body. And so we're going to call this photo. Okay? And instead of just having this image here, what we're going to do is we're just going to use our constant. And we're going to resume just to make sure that everything is still working well. And there we go. Everything is still perfect. So now we are using a constant that we have defined as a placeholder image, because when you're generating a thumbnail, you'll likely have not all the thumbnails. If you have like a grid of previews of all the AR files that you have in your app, you likely won't have all the thumbnails ready. And so you just want to show a placeholder image until those files are generated. Now what you'll see is once you generate thumbnails, they'll be cached automatically by the framework. And so next time you load the app, the thumbnail should be there, if caching is at least enabled. Okay, so what we'll do next is we'll actually start working on our thumbnail generator. Now this is the important part of the code, so make sure you pay close attention. We're going to create a new file, and we're just going to do a basic Swift file. I'm going to create it. Oops, I named it file. Ooh, that was not good. Okay, we're going to call this thumbnail generator, and we're going to also call that thumbnail generator. You really want to give it a proper name before creating the file. Now, there are a few things that we're going to actually import here. Now, I would like to actually preface this saying that Apple has some sample code on their website for generating thumbnails in general. They don't necessarily have it for AR objects or whatever, but I adopted that code and modified it to make it work with USDZ files in this case and with SwiftUI. Now, the first framework what we're going to import is QuickLookThumbnailing, and this is what's actually going to generate our thumbnails, and this is an Apple framework. The next we're going to do is SwiftUI. We're going to also import Combine, which is Apple's framework for creating asynchronous code. It's really fascinating too. I'm not an expert at it, and so I won't be going too much into it, but I am learning it. And so if you want to learn more about it, feel free to ask me questions, and I can actually make videos on your questions. Okay, and so we're also going to use UIKit, because there is this thing that you'll see in this class, which we need UIKit for. I just don't know what the SwiftUI equivalent of it is yet, and so that is it. Now, what we're going to do is we're going to create, as usual, a class called ThumbnailGenerator. Now, what we're going to do different here is we're going to make this a observable object. And the reason why we're going to make this an observable object is we want to make this class a publisher. We're going to have a variable which is called has a property wrapper called published, and we're going to call this thumbnail image, which is going to be an optional, and this is actually a SwiftUI image. So if you're familiar with UIKit or AppKit, you would either have UI image or NS image. In this case, it's just image, which is for SwiftUI. And so what's going to happen is when the thumbnail generator class notices that we have updated thumbnail image, it'll publish this update to whatever classes or objects are listening for or subscribed to this publisher. So now that we have our published variable, which is a property wrapper, like I mentioned, we're going to create our function called generate thumbnail. Okay, and there are a few parameters that we need to pass in to generate this thumbnail. And so the first thing we're going to do is resource. And this is really the file name without the extension. We're also going to have with extension, and that's going to also be a string, but we're going to provide a default value. As of now, I believe only USDZ files and maybe reality files are supported in this thumbnail generator. And so for now, we're just going to assume that you always pass in a USDZ file. And then also the size of the image, the desired output size that we want from the image. So that's what our function looks like. Now, the first thing we're going to do in this function is we're going to create a URL, a file URL for this resource. So we're going to try to locate this file in our bundle, in our app bundle, and create a URL for it. And so we're going to create a guard let URL equals bundle main URL for resource, and we're going to call this resource with extension. Okay. Now, if we can't create this URL, what needs to happen is we just have to give an error. Now you can pass in an error, or just I'm doing a print statement for now, but keep in mind that you have to properly handle this error, unable to create URL for resource. Okay, and then we return. Now, if we're able to create the URL, then what that means is that the function was able to find a file with that file name and extension, so that file exists. Now, what we would do next is, this is where UIKit, the framework, comes in handy. So various screens have different scales, and what the scale really means is like the pixel ratio. So a retina display usually has a scale of 2 or 3. A normal screen has a scale of 1. And so I don't know what the equivalent of this is for SwiftUI, and so I'm just using UIKit for that, but this is the only reason why we imported UIKit in this class. And then what we're actually going to create now is the request. So if you've ever done like a network request, a download, whatever, this is very common code to you. You can actually do some of this in the combined framework, where it's like a new way of kind of doing asynchronous code. I just don't know how to do it yet, and I didn't find any sample code online for it. Okay, so then we're gonna do let request equals QL thumbnail generator request. Let's see, request, oh, that's capital. And we're gonna use that one. So file at URL, obviously we have that URL. The size, we also have the size. We passed it in as a parameter. The scale we also have. And we're gonna do the presentation types. We're gonna do all. Now, once we have that, then we're gonna actually create the generator, okay? So we're gonna create the generator, which is gonna be in charge of handling this request. I'm gonna say QL thumbnail generator. And then we're going to get a shared generator. So this is, if you look at the documentation, it's a singleton to the thumbnail generator instance. Okay, that way we always use the same instance. And so we're going to say generator dot generate. So there's multiple things that we can do. We can generate the best representation, and it'll give us the highest quality possible. But that can actually be taxing on your device, especially if you have an older device. And then we can use generate representations, which will actually go for a lower quality and then also queue a higher quality version of it. When that completes, it'll re-update the image to the highest quality. And then you can also save. So you can also save this for offline use. We're just gonna use the one that has all the representations. Okay, so for request, and then update, we're actually not gonna use this. We're just gonna say, so we're gonna just change this code to do. And then we are going to enter in because these will be provided by the closure for us. And so that's what we're gonna do. Let's see, there we go. And so then what we're gonna do now is we're gonna dispatch, we're gonna actually get a dispatch queue for the main, an asynchronous queue for main, because anything that we wanna do that relates to the UI, essentially passing in this image back to the UI, we wanna do on the main thread. Now, never do anything intense on the main thread. This is just for updating the UI. And so we're gonna say if thumbnail, okay, if our thumbnail is nil or our error is non-nil. This is a little bit redundant, but you know, this is, yeah, just to make sure. Then we have an error. So we're gonna say print thumbnail, error generating thumbnail, and then we're also gonna include an error description because we want to know what happened. Now, what I've noticed is if you were to run this in a simulated device, it will just give you an error with an error code 0 or 2, and it will just show a placeholder image. It won't actually generate the image, but when you put it on your device, it actually works. So I was a little bit frustrated when this initially happened, but do not worry, it'll actually, it'll work on your device. And so I'll show that at the end of this video. And then if the else condition means that we actually have now a thumbnail. And so what we're gonna do is we're gonna say, okay, self thumbnail image. We're gonna create a image from a UI image. Because what happens here is that we get a thumbnail which has either so I can show that to you. You have a thumbnail which has either a CG image or a UI image. I'm just gonna use a UI image. Now I forgot to add the proper signature for the function. So this is what it is. So now that we're actually, so once the generator has a thumbnail and we're providing this back to our published variable, anything that listens to this variable will be updated by the UI automatically, because this is a state managed by SwiftUI. And so this is really awesome. So what we're gonna do now is we're gonna go back to our content view, and we are going to now update our code to take into account, to actually also first run our thumbnail generator and then subscribe to any events from that thumbnail generator. And so we're gonna create a observable or an observed object. So be careful, there's observable object and observed object. And this is essentially saying, okay, we're gonna subscribe to this generator. Thumbnail generator equals thumbnail generator. So here we're creating that. And then in our action, what we're gonna do is, so when the user presses generate, what we want is we want to generate our thumbnail. And so in this case, we're gonna use a asset that I bought on TurboSquid, contemporary fan. And again, I'm not providing the extension because it's just a USDZ file, which is the default anyway. And we're gonna do a CG size of, I'm gonna create it 400 by 400 pixels. You can figure out what is best for your solution. And so we're gonna create that. So when the user actually presses this action, it's gonna generate this thumbnail, okay? Now, the only thing is we're not, so I can show you what that would look like. Now, it's not gonna really work yet because we're on a simulated device, but you'll at least see what the generator is doing. So I press generate, and it's not really doing anything. I'll show it on device once it's working. The reason why it's not doing anything is because we have our placeholder image. It doesn't do anything there. And so we're gonna comment this out, and we're gonna say, okay, we want to look at the thumbnail image of our generator. If this is non-nil, then we want that image to be used. So we're gonna say self thumbnail generator thumbnail image. If this is not nil, then I want to use this image in my UI. Okay, so then we're gonna say, okay, use this image, and we're gonna apply the same modifiers we have here. Okay, I'm gonna make this a little bit neater and then I'll tell you what I've done. Okay, and then if not, then I want to use the placeholder image that we initially used. Okay, so I hope this makes sense. This is essentially a conditional statement. Okay, I'll go over this. It's a little bit messy just because of the way the code is laid out. So we're gonna check if the thumbnail image is not nil. If it's not nil, we're gonna use this image, unwrap it because it has to be a non-optional. We're gonna use the resizable, we're gonna use all the parameters that we have. If it is nil, then we're gonna use the other condition and we're gonna use the placeholder image. So once we have this, then let's try it out on our device and see how it works. Okay, so now you can see that the file has, or the app has loaded. We're gonna generate the thumbnail. Okay, unable to create URL for resource. That's why it wasn't working, so I didn't have debugging enabled. I forgot one thing. I didn't add my asset. And so let's import an asset. And so in the debugger, you can now see unable to create URL for resource. And that's a good thing that we have that error message. And so what we're going to do now is we are going to add in our contemporary fan. If you've watched my previous tutorials, you know that I've used this a lot. Okay, so here's our fan. There we go. And so when I rerun this app, it should work now. So we see the app and we're gonna press generate and we see this placeholder and now we see our image. So before the image was ready, the QuickLookGenerator gave me a AR preview image, and now that it's ready, it gave me an AR image with an AR icon in the top right. And so this is really awesome because if you have a lot of assets, if your app imports assets, from online sources, and you want to give people a thumbnail of what they're gonna see in the AR experience, it is extremely helpful to have a thumbnail. Now, and that's how you automatically generate a thumbnail for your USDZ files. Now, I hope that this video was helpful to you. If it was, please give it a like. I really appreciate that. If you have any questions on what I covered, or if you want to see any other tutorials, feel free to leave a comment down below. And if you want to see more videos like these, please subscribe.